Hello YouTube. Welcome back to my annual update of the real estate market for macadamia farms. A lot's happened in the last year, and 2022 is one of the more interesting ones as the macadamia price falls and the conditions for macadamia farming deteriorate generally in terms of profitability. And I've started the video here for a reason. I'm here on Eureka Road at Federal, and I'm looking at a wall of macadamia trees. When I first started looking for macadamia farms, I thought this was the best macadamia farm I had ever seen. They were thick, green hedges. I thought these must be the healthiest trees. And then, of course, I realised it was one of the worst macadamia farms I've seen because at the time the rows hadn't been removed as they have been now. You can see that the rows have been removed because there are these great big tall trees and nothing much between them. Now, they'll recover over time, although the trees are still very tall, and there's almost, I think the spacing between them is barely 2 metres. So they'll stay a bit of a hedge, but yeah, and ironically, as I make this video, I can buy this macadamia farm, but not in the way anyone would have thought. Byron Council, and I don't know how they manage this, approved a development plan that once you drive down the driveway of the farm, leads to a number of residential lots for basically luxury homes. And it's on condition that this macadamia farm remains at the front. There's only about 5-6 rows of trees, but it's almost like keeping the facade on a heritage building and then building something else behind it. So if you're interested in buying a block of land for residential purposes, you can. I don't know who gets the nuts, but let's just call that an aberration because it's a sad development really, particularly when they've done some good work to rehabilitate the trees themselves. But on with real farms. Now, if you do want to buy an actual macadamia farm, well, here's one for you. This one's called Loose Goose. It's in Bencluna Road at Eureka, and it is very much the typical old macadamia farm. It's got nice wide row spacing, but as you can see, the trees just about fill that up. There isn't a whole lot of ground cover. The trees are massive. They're by any modern standards, well and truly overgrown. Seem to be largely 3-4-4s by what I'm seeing here, although there must be a little bit of variety, and fairly dark and gloomy under the trees. There are a few of these farms for sale up with Sotheby's at the moment, and they're a large commercial owner who've put several farms up on the market. I'm not sure they're getting out of macadamias entirely, but they're certainly getting out of them in this area. And I suspect the farms have been actively farmed, but perhaps not with a long-term view when it comes to things like pruning and other orchard maintenance. It's not a bad farm, and when I look at a farm, I judge it by whether it's got good bones, is one of the terms I use. If it's got good bones in terms of nice land, the ability to farm the land well, trees that could be subject to rehabilitation, then, it's something you can consider. However, a farm like this, an overgrown tall farm, which will need a lot of money to rehabilitate into a commercially viable crop, you would want to buy this farm with a lot of extra spare money to actually do that work, because it's one of the farms where, in a low macadamia price environment, where you've got less than optimal production as well as a low price, it's very easy to become more unprofitable than you otherwise would be. And obviously, there's an opportunity if you wanted to do the farm rehab, if you wanted to do some severe pruning of these enormously high trees, you could. And the trees like these, particularly the old Hawaiians, will sulk for a few years anyway while they get their act back together again and grow some new foliage to fruit off. But once you do that, the macadamia price might have recovered, but you're going to have precious little income from it in the short term, in the hope, of course, that you can get something in the medium term. What that means, of course, is that you would want to buy this farm at the right price. And from what I'm hearing, the price demand is fairly high. So that brings me to the subject of the market generally. And certainly in the first half of 2022, in February 22, we had the price announcements from the major processors announcing a price reduction down to about $3.80 a kilo. And I thought that might prompt some farms to come on the market. It did, not very many, and in fact, the real reaction seemed to be is that the market slowed down. It seemed that the price demands were still up there, but the farms weren't really moving. There wasn't much interest from purchasers. In fact, the farm I showed you in last year's update never sold. It turns out, I didn't know now, I didn't know then, but I do know now, that it was on the market for $4.5 million. Didn't sell for $4.5 million. You can draw your own conclusions as to whether or not that was a reasonable price to be asking for the farm I showed you. But in the end, it just got pulled from the market. It's still with the existing owners. And so there are other farms on the market, a few more, not heaps more. There's not some smorgasbord for people to choose from as at October 2022. But what there is has been staying on the market for a while. We don't have this mad rush of farms being listed on the market and then sold within a week or two. It just isn't happening that way. And there's a couple of sort of even mid-sized farms that lifestylers would look at that have in fact been on the market for quite a while. The other pressure that is sort of being faced, a unique pressure, I guess, is that residential pressure, and Clunes is the subject of a development proposal, just an idea at this stage going through Lismore Council. They're trying to find high land to move people out from the floodplain, and there's a proposal to release 65 hectares of land just to the west of Clunes for a housing development. Now that, if approved, would completely change Clunes, but would also get rid of some A-grade farming district that is presently used, at least partly, for macadamias, the other part for cattle. So, getting back to actual macadamia farms themselves, it seems to be that the prices haven't softened yet, but the recent pricing news, particularly in October 2022, indicating at a price that would head beneath $3 a kilo, means that smaller farmers, those without economies of scale, will find it very difficult to make a profit. The lifestyle farmers who use contractors for everything will find it really quite costly because the nuts don't reimburse all of the costs they're incurring as easily as they used to when the price was $6 a kilo. And so those with the sort of hinterland dream of owning a macadamia farm in the Northern Rivers that would be self-sustaining or maybe produce you a little bit of income while you do your other job might get a little bit discouraged. Of course, there's the interest rate environment impacting on all that. That impacts not only on profitability, but of course the ability of people in the major cities to come in, buy a farm, in addition to the home that they already have. So there are, in theory, a bunch of pressures that should be working very negatively on the macadamia farm price, and that may happen. Just hasn't happened yet. Perhaps there's a market lag up here. Perhaps people are prepared to wait longer to sell their properties because they're not yet in a financially stressed position. Perhaps there's still the lifestyle pull, and it's a very real pull of people wanting to leave Sydney and other major cities in Australia in order to enjoy the farming lifestyle. You know, the area in general has gone up in real estate values, you know, around Byron in particular, massively over the past few years, and it's retreating only reluctantly, although you do hear anecdotes of houses around Bangalow and those sorts of up-and-coming areas retreating a bit. Those are the ones without farms attached. So if you're looking to buy a macadamia farm now, a couple of things. Firstly, don't let anyone tell you it's a seller's market. It's not anymore. Secondly, the prices that farms might have been sold for, if they were last sold between, say, 2018 and 2021, were, you know, factoring in a macadamia price that is much higher than it is now. So now more than ever, you don't want to be depending on past prices to guide a current farm purchase. Plenty of real estate agents would like you to do that, but in reality, you know, with the macadamia farm price dropping, you need to factor that in. Also, the real estate agents who will glibly tell you that you can get contractors to do everything may not be factoring in the lower macadamia price and the fact that it might not be financially viable to do all that on, you know, the returns you get for your crop. And so it might not be as much lifestyle and relaxing on the balcony as you thought it was. And that's not a bad thing, you know. Getting in and doing some farming is great. But, you know, just don't be misled by anyone about that. Yeah, it all looks very nice and peaceful, and as I've said in other videos, the trees look very much like they look after themselves, but that isn't how tree nut farming works, certainly not how macadamia nut farming works. And so you're in a position, particularly for farms that have been on the market for a while, where I think you can drive a hard bargain, but expectations do have to shift, and perhaps it will take a little time to do that. If you are a long-term investor looking at this industry and buying a macadamia farm for commercial use, you do need to be playing the very long game. Macadamia prices, I suspect, will be low for a little while, and if you buy a farm like this, you need to know that a profitable farm is one that produces, you know, upwards of 4 tonnes a hectare. A farm in this condition is very unlikely to do that, simply because it needs, you know, restorative work, particularly, you know, bringing the heights of the trees down, rejuvenating the fruiting wood, and actually, you know, getting to that level where, you know, more tonnes per hectare can be mathematically worked in. And I've said this before, but it really bears repeating. You need an agronomist to look at any farm that you're buying, because if you are looking at actively working a macadamia farm for profit, you need to do your numbers, you need to have a history of cropping, and the agronomist will hopefully be up to date on what it costs to do things, particularly fertilizing, spraying, harvesting, and then factor in whether or not you can break even, make a profit, or if you can't make a profit now, when will you make one, assuming prices are at X level, Y level, that sort of thing. If it all sounds very risky, well, you know, it's supposed to. Macadamia farming is an investment like any other investment. Farming crops are always a little bit risky anyway, because they depend on the weather, they depend on, you know, market conditions, various other world markets. You could say the same for commodity markets. You can say the same for lots of different things, you know, even some desk jobs. That is the nature of the game. So, you know, you don't go into something like this spending your last dollar. You do need to have a little bit of a buffer in reserve so that you can, you know, ride the swings and roundabouts without coming to real grief. Underneath it all, of course, macadamia farms are still the most beautiful things, and they're the most lovely activity to do. It's a very absorbing activity, It's a very peaceful activity, and it is food for the soul. None of that has changed this year, and I don't think it will change any year for the foreseeable future, and that's why I'm still here. Thanks for watching the update, guys. Love your comments down below, particularly if you've been looking for a farm, and any anecdotes from real estate agents would be well and truly appreciated. Bye for now.